Let's dive into our House of the Dragon season 2 review. And I have some Ravens, maybe I'll pull up too, some people's thoughts. Interesting, by the way, because on YouTube, it feels like some people were a lot more negative. On TikTok, people were overwhelmingly positive about the season. So it's kind of hard to gauge people. We, of course, have our YouTube polls. And, we typically go off of that because that's you guys directly voting. And over the course of the season, everybody was still pretty positive. I would say that the finale episode was I believe is the lowest rated episode we have of any episode in our season. But again, I still stand by what I said. I liked the episode as a standalone episode, but I certainly get people being upset with it as a season finale.
I didn't have as much problem with it as the finale, but like we can't deny that it was probably supposed to be an episode 8 of 10 is what it is kind of thing. They made the best of it. And for me, it's also just certainly not nearly as terrible as it seems to be online. It's interesting the different platforms promote different things. Like I hear a lot of positive things on the TikTok side of things, like as far as the social interaction goes. And then obviously Twitter, Reddit, YouTube tends to be a little bit more negative, though YouTube can have its nuances every now and then, but it just depends. So this season is a lot more polarizing than season 1. I think that's safe to say. In some ways I like season 2 more than season 1. And then in some ways I like season 1 more than season 2. I think if I took them pound for pound, I probably like season 1 a little bit more. Though season 2, yes, but I will say this. I think I like season 2's pacing. Maybe not pacing is the word, but like I like the fact that we were with one set of actors and actresses, and there was a ton of character development over that time. But looking back on season 1, it's almost even more impressive because of the time jumps that they had to wrestle with, and they end up still making a very comprehensible season of television and competent television. And there's a good chance that season 1 should have just absolutely fell on its face with all the time jumps and character switching and whatever. So I think season 1 to me is, and also let's be honest, season 1 had way more writing on it. If it was even remotely bad, we were screwed. So I think season 1 to me is still maybe a bit more impressive, but I overall love the acting, character development, and everything else in season 2 just a little bit more. So I don't know. I love both, Matt. It's like an 8.9 versus a 9 for me or something like that. Like it's so razor close. I loved both seasons.
Yeah. I prefer season 2, even though I think, I agree with you. I think they're pretty close. They both do things well and they both do things not so well. I think the time jumps, especially now seeing a season 2 where it's like, wow, look at how good it is, where it's just start to finish, right?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Of course, they were trying to adapt the source material the way it was, so that's not like they were like, hey, we're gonna do all these time jumps. I mean, it's the source material you're adapting calls for that, so I don't really discredit them there, but just as a viewer, I obviously prefer a more straightforward narrative than the time jumps, the different actors and actresses.
Mm-hmm.
Of course, season 2 didn't really have much Viserys, although we get a little, so that helped.
That's a huge void that I felt. I'm not gonna lie to you guys. Like,
yeah,
Viserys was probably the standout for me in the show, and it is what it is. Like, you can't just keep him around because he's great, right? So it is what it is. But I do think that shadow did have a little. It overcast it. I don't know if we got that Viserys level performance that we did in episode 8 of season 1, the walk. I don't know if we ever got to that level for me.
Yeah, season 1 was also very much more political, whereas season 2 was very much more like prophetic. I was really not expecting that. Where season 2 was a little more way heavier into that. So yeah, so for me, I'll start with let me give the negatives for season 2, and then I'll give my positives. Then I'll talk back to you. And I think that's kind of a good way for us to do this, Jay.
Sure.
Okay. So I'll start with the negatives because we get a lot of people commenting and be like, "You guys are just stands, and you guys, there's nothing you dislike." But I don't know. During season 8 of Game of Thrones, during season 8 of Game of Thrones, we literally have reviews on iTunes that are like, you guys are too favorable of it and you guys are too critical of it. So I don't know.
We've been cursed with that for a long time.
Yeah, it just is what it is. So The negatives. I think even after I've seen it all, I still am a little irked by Blood and Cheese not having like the choice. I get why they did it. And and obviously I think they did a very good job of taking it and adapting in a way that makes it for the greens, right? Where you can now shift the story and focus on like, oh, this was our mess up. So the aftermath of Blood and Cheese went in a direction I was not expecting whatsoever. And I actually loved that.
Yeah.
I am still a little I'm still a little irked they didn't have like the choice, because I felt like that was a big part of it. And not having that other kid does create some interesting dynamics, but I still like the moment itself. Still a little, there's still just a little bit of me that's like, I felt like you still could have maybe had it and done something different. But regardless, I did ultimately actually end up liking the aftermath of the and the new things that it caused by not having the other kid there. Some other negatives. I think Corlys Velaryon was totally lost this season. I mean, like the final conversation we got with him and Adam was great, but I felt like he was basically not in this season whatsoever. I think Rhaenys' death didn't have the weight it should have had, and the impact. It sort of felt like they just moved on from it pretty fast. And I will agree with some people. I do think we needed like maybe some sort of action there at the end, right? Especially since we kind of thought we were going to get some in the second to last episode with all the dragons landing. We're like, okay, this is about to get sweet. Now, I still, again, liked the final episode as a standalone episode, but I do agree as a season finale, it's a little tough, even though I still think in the future, when I go back and binge this, I'll like love this episode and I'll still be clicking next as quickly as I possibly can. So even like my negatives of this season are things that are like, well, I kind of see why they did it, and I do it, and I get it, because I always want to see the whole picture. But I definitely agree with some people that, yeah, as a season finale, that's a little tough to swallow, because you're hoping for something kind of cool, only because it felt like if there had been another big like battle or something that had taken place in between episodes 4 and 8, then it wouldn't have made like everyone just getting ready for war at the end not feel as like, all right, now we have to wait again. So I'm kind of there. As far as other negatives, before I get to my positives, I still need to see more of Rhaena to see what's going on there, to be like, are they just cutting nettles out, right? I still need to like see a little bit more of that, because I'm kind of on the fence, because there's a piece of it, and I don't want to go into spoilers here, of the nettles thing that I think is like a pretty important piece, that if they cut that out, then I'm going to need to see how they do it, or I may end up really not liking it. But right now I'm kind of like, it might be okay. So I don't really know about that, whether or not that's going to be something that I'm actually cool or not with the nettles thing. But the only other negative I can really think of, and I've been just trying to piece this all together a week, and I kind of wanted to do it just on the fly, so because I felt like if I really dive deep and dissect things, then it's not really my view on it and how I actually view it. So the only other thing is, I felt like there wasn't enough Aemond in the first couple episodes. There should have been a little more Aemond. And I feel like they really need to figure something out with Alicent. Otherwise, she's going to be kind of like totally lost as a character, and her screen time will feel almost like Baelish like in season 7, where they're like, we don't really know what to do with Baelish. So, okay. So those are my negatives. Positives, obviously, all the Rainy stuff was freaking sweet. Episode 4 was phenomenal, so epic. Absolutely loved that moment. Loved the fallout of Blood and Cheese, because it gave the Greens more context. Actually, I'll say the Greens are probably the best part of this whole season, in that they totally took the story in directions I didn't think would go, because as we've talked about before, it's like an outline, right? So you don't have all this context for them. And honestly, to me, the the star of this whole season is Aegon. I wasn't expecting Aegon to go nearly the direction they went with him, and it makes him so big. Now every time I see him on screen, I'm like locked in.
Yeah.
Whereas the book kind of makes it like, well, he's not like another like tyrant like Joffrey, but he's just like, you just kind of don't like him, and whatever. So I think Aegon's like surprise star of this whole season. So yeah, I mean, I really liked the season. I thought the Cargill stuff with the brothers was awesome. Kristen Cole's conversation with Allison's brother was great. I thought Kristen Cole was an amazing villain. I mean, like we were talking about how much like he might be the worst villain ever. Like when he's like,
and then a direct change into someone who has seen some awful things and it really affected him, which we both liked.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So I mean, yeah, and I've talked about before. So overall, I really like the season. I'm at like a 4 out of 5 for me. It's a 4 out of 5 for a season. Thought it was great. Yeah, had some negatives, had obviously a lot more positives, but yeah, I mean, overall, I really liked it. But I would say those are like the standout things aside from it just being the classic HBO amazing show.
Yeah, I mean, before I begin, I just want to say there's so many things that we take for granted when it comes to an HBO show. The score, cinematography, a lot of the costume, these things that so many other shows do not land on and do not fit. So all of that, like that gets completely ignored whenever it comes to online critiques that I see that I find to be a little bit more low effort. But when it comes to negatives, there's some stuff I agree with you on. And then there's some differences as well. One of the number one things I thought of throughout the entire season, and I started mentioning it more and more as we went on, is Corlys Velaryon. Not his performance, not the scenes that we got not that they weren't good, but a lot of them felt a little quick. And I think that the final conversation season really helped a lot with me. And I was just like, man, knowing that Steve Toussaint is capable of this, and the Alan actor was amazing. Like, why didn't we get more of this before? I know you got to build it up, but so many times we cut to a 1-minute scene at a shipyard, and
I don't want to cut you off here. But do you think Corlys was the thing that got cut? Now that we're looking at this and we're like, they had to cut stuff and stuff like that. It seems like it literally seems like all of his scenes were filmed in like one day.
Well, that's my biggest negative of the season is resources being cut. It was a resource issue. The reason why they couldn't do a battle at the end of the season, and then they lost the 2 episodes. And I was about to say, I think there's a lot of seafaring stuff that was not included. And pretty much every single Corlys scene, almost every single one, happens at the same exact shipyard, same exact place, looks like the exact same day. And it's very obvious when you think about it in totality of all the scenes combined together. Not saying that there weren't other ones. Obviously, he had different characters and stuff, but with his sons, those might have all been shot in the same day. And I think you can feel that, which is a shame.
How much screen time? I mean, because I broke down the numbers real quick, and I'm sorry to keep interrupting on your point here, Jimmy, but just to add on to this, because I broke down the total screen time, and this, because of the extra length of episodes, it actually still is about roughly the same as a 10 episode season, like minutes wise. But total screen time of Corlys Velaryon this season, do you think it's even 30 minutes for an entire season?
No, I think it's probably less than 20 to 25 minutes. We could look, we could find out. And it's not so much the runtime difference, it's the resource difference. Like that is, you only get so much. You know what I mean?
I mean, it's literally like, all right, we're going to do camera A with Corlys. Okay, now we're going to do camera B with Corlys. All right, now let's do camera C,
Which is a shame, because I love his character. I love what they're doing with him. And, him and Rhaenys, I wanted a little bit more fallout, even though we did end up getting the amazing scene with his daughter, which was excellent. So there's something to be said about maybe feeling a little stretched out, which is also another negative, right? The internal pacing to each of the episodes felt varied every single week. And that's not always a bad thing. Like, you want to keep things fresh and switch things up. And I know there's different people directing and writing, and that's just like the nature of this television game that we play. However, it did at times feel like sometimes you're watching like a different show week to week. And I don't mean like the quality was so much different, but just like sometimes the vibes were a little bit not off, but varying in ways that I didn't expect. So that would probably be my other negative, is just like there were times in the season where I felt like we were cutting so fast to different things instead of maybe sitting in a scene for 10 to 15 minutes and then having, maybe a 5 minute scene and then cutting back or something like that. And maybe we could have found a way to structure this differently. And this brings me into my final negative, and this is the one that no one's going to agree with me on. I think they should have changed more from Fire and Blood. I think that there is an opportunity to rework things, to switch around scenes and character arcs. I think they actually could do more. Now, there's going to be some people who didn't enjoy the season who think it's all character assassination and the book is perfect and blah, blah, blah. Those people are going to say, oh, they changed plenty. But what I'm saying is that because this show was so centered around Rhaenyra and Alicent, I think that following so closely to the timeline for the most part is actually maybe going to be a bit of a detriment. And that if we're going to play out character arcs as far as like what happens bullet point wise, maybe some of those things should be changed or switched around. So I actually think that a lot of the changes in the show, for a positive, I think a lot of the changes are actually pretty good, but I think they may have needed more. And I think we're going to see changes with Alicent's storyline. And I think that we could have possibly made 8 episodes work. I don't think they even had time, though. I think the scripts are written. They scrambled to rewrite to make the kind of button it up at episode 8 instead of episode 10. But who's to say that we don't change a little bit and Rook's Rest gets scaled down just a little bit, and then we have some sort of mid-sized skirmish, like bring something up is what I'm trying to say. Mix up the timeline for the show. So there's almost some part of me that feels like they're struggling to stay loyal to Fire and Blood and to George R. R. Martin's lore, while also attempting to do things in a manner that is going to pay off for the visual medium, which is very, very different. Now, they are messing with the lore a little bit, and obviously George is a little pissed off about it. You can tell. If you go to Nuttwork, I think it's obvious that he's at least annoyed by some of the changes. But I think that there's opportunities to change more, and maybe it could have made it a smoother episode, a season. Now, that is very easy for me to say without being a writer and doing these things. So that's probably my last negative. That I can think of. A little bit of fast time travel stuff that we saw in seasons 7 and 8, but it's television. I'm not nearly as hardcore about that stuff as some other people are. That probably is it for that. Now, positives. I really enjoyed being with the same cast all season long. I think that there are very evident character arcs, though some of them are circular. And that is okay. That is a valid character arc, by the way. I saw a lot of people saying that Daemon kneeled at the end of season 1 and beginning of season 2, and at the end he ends up kneeling again, and we're supposed to be amazed. And it's like, well, the kneel from the beginning of the season, the kneeling of the end of the season are very different, and he is a different person because of that. So that plays into one of my biggest positives is the embracement of prophecy and fantastical elements and calling back to a lot of the stuff that makes this fantasy show, which I happen to be a pretty big fan of. So I love that. The score, phenomenal, huge plus, huge plus. And I also think that for the challenge of what they had with the limited episode, limited resources, and a ton of actors and actresses to get through, I thought that they did their very best to give everyone a moment to shine. Biggest positive of the season is surprisingly the Greens. So I agree with you, Matt. I think Aegon is my standout for this season. I think he was amazing. And I actually loved Aemon and how much nonverbal storytelling and character development they did with him, with simple shots of him interacting with other characters without saying very much. And I think that is part of the art of filmmaking or storytelling. And they did a really nice job of that. So that's kind of how I feel. I also thought that thematically this season was phenomenal. And maybe we'll have an episode where we break down some of the big themes and kind of like micro plots of the season. The twin brothers, small folk, twin brothers, sacrifice. There's a lot of there. Also, I would argue to say even a little bit of like mysticism / religious themes.
All the stuff with Helena was awesome.
Helena is definitely going to be one of the big positives here. So I liked a lot of this stuff. And maybe people would disagree with me that, one of my positives is the changes. Some of the changes were really good. I like them quite a bit. So that's kind of my thing. I want to ask you this, Matt, though, kind of moving into this next section of this recap. Your outstanding performance of the season, would it go to Aegon as your number one?
Oh, definitely.
Yeah. Me too. Specifically him and Larys. Him and Larys on screen together added so much to those two characters. It was absolutely ridiculous. I loved it. Most underrated, or maybe most like, secondary, I would say Helena. I thought Helena did a great job here too.
Yeah, absolutely. And I saw some people saying they're assassinating Helena's character, and I'm like, what are you?
What character?
What character? There is like what
Guys,
character in the book?
sorry,
Get the book. Point. If I got a copy of Fire and Blood right over there. Oh, just you point to me exactly where they're
I
assassinating.
love
her
Fire and
character,
Blood, but people need to be realistic about this. I mean,
it's
it's
an
so
outline.
ridiculous, dude. Come on.
It's an
Come on.
outline. It's not.
Yeah.
I mean, yes, you want to say they're assassinating Damon's character. Okay, I could see an argument for that, but Helena's character, what character? Please point it out to me. I would love to see it.
Yeah, I think Helena has been phenomenal in the show.
Yeah, I mean, if anything, I wish we got more of her.
Yeah.
Right? I mean, she's every time something you got to pay attention to, and it seems like there's this opposing mysticism. Right? We saw a Green Man.
Dude, how about that? We
That's
just out of the
insane.
forest. Really, it's a Green Man. So that's
yeah, that's
another
thing. Yeah, even more insane, crazy. All the Harrenhal stuff, I get it. Yeah, I mean, it does. After a while, it's like, all right, man. God, I wish Damon. It's like that's the whole deal. It's like I wish Damon were out there doing something else. Right? I wish we were seeing
at the end. It kind of tied in.
people. Yeah, it did. No, it did. Yeah, it did. Yeah. It just would have been even more cool if we had saw a big battle where Damon's out there like roasting people at the end, and then it would make all the Harrenhal stuff feel that much more impactful and everything.
Yes. Oh, they could have left him out of a couple episodes, which they're not going to do because Matt Smith's the most popular actor in the show by fan voting. And two, this is an example. They kind of, I mean, with him being in Harrenhal, not the prophecy stuff, that's following the book structure, right? They could have switched this. They could have had small skirmishes, him joining in one of the Riverlands kind of Civil War type moments. Like they could have changed things up, but instead they said, well, let's keep him in Harrenhal. What's the most interesting thing we can do while following him being there? And then they tied into all this lore stuff that personally I really liked.
Yeah. I also saw for whatever reason they cut out Cregan Stark. And like just for some reason they just cut him out of that. I don't have no idea why
they pushed it into season 3.
Yeah, but there's somebody literally showed a green screen edit. It's like somebody in the editing team released it, and you can literally see Cregan Stark was in that scene walking. They said Cregan Stark was going to be in it, and then for whatever reason they cut him out.
You think it's from budget?
Maybe they're like, well, that's one more royalty we'll have to pay.
That's what
literally that might have been the reason.
I think they squeezed this for every penny they had. I think that they were putting.
I think so too. And you and I talked about that. We said, why didn't they do like to me, it almost use footage. You show the Night King, and then you could show Daenerys.
And the CGI wasn't as sharp in the still frame.
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of okay because it's like supposed to be kind of wonky or whatever. They actually did another Warner Brothers thing. They did the same thing in The Flash. And they said it was a directive choice. If you go watch the scene in the Flash movie that came out a couple years ago, and there's this scene where it's like he's doing he's running super fast, so everything, and it looks almost cartoonish, and it's kind of weird. But they said it was a creative choice, but it's like, I don't know. Are you sure it wasn't a budget choice? So yeah, what I wasn't, because I saw the leaks of that beforehand, and I had messaged you and I was like, dude, it looks awful. And then I saw it in fast pace, not at like a 240p resolution,
right,
like somebody's like
right,
and I was like, okay,
intended, right, that's how they intended you to see it. So
like Daenerys is actually like the White Walker general. To me was like, I felt like you should have shown the Night King. Daenerys from the back being like a silhouette, I was totally fine with, because it's like in this dream world.
We would love to see Emilia Clarke again, but whatever,
for sure. Yeah. But you may have to give her a royalty if you show the actual image of her, and so maybe that's why that literally might be why they did some of those things. So yeah, just I mean, the final scene was still super epic anyway, with everyone like marching, getting ready to go to war. Like that was fine as a scene just on its own. But yeah, I agree with you. Like now that we're getting this news and I still stand by what I said and what I've said all season, which is if the directors made the choice to say, we want it to be 8 episodes, which is the way it was presented, by the way.
Only person that kind of mentioned was Sarah Hess. Sarah Hess said it was a company decision. We had nothing to say.
Right. But other people said, no, we want 8. Like, we're going to do 8 longer episodes, which I am fine with, because like shows like The Mandalorian have done that, where it's like, okay, this episode's going to be 47 minutes. This episode's going to be 23 minutes. Like, not as much as happening in this episode. That's fine. and then you have an episode like it's an hour. Like if you go watch like The Mandalorian and some of those Star Wars shows, times are like all over the place for episodes.
Yeah.
And even Stranger Things did that in its last season. Stranger Things had one of its episodes as like a movie. It was like a 2-hour episode. Awesome. You know, if that's what you want to do, like I'm fine with you telling the story you need to tell. And if it's a shorter episode or if it's a longer episode, as long as like you're creatively like, this is the story I want to tell, that's cool. But now that we're getting in, it's like, oh no, it was budget stuff. Now it's like looking back, it's kind of like, okay, I can see where that stuff is. But when you're going week to week, it's hard to tell.
Yeah, I think here's what happened. I mean, and we know what happened, right? So they cut it and they said, okay, this is the stopping point. We're going to rewrite this episode 8 and kind of go towards this kind of hyped up ending. And what they did was they relied on what didn't cost them any more money. And that was letting the actors and actresses act. That final episode is just a lot of them acting. And I know it sounds weird, like James, they act every episode, but like they said, the spectacles are way ramped down and we need you to go out there and give a performance to make this episode last to get us into season 3. And for that, I like that. I like that a lot. And I thought they did a nice job.
Yeah. I mean, and we've talked about like people saying, oh, we needed more action. Right.
I guess, I don't know.
I mean, I guess it's just like is for a lot of that is like, should action be specifically like a big battle? Can action be like two brothers fighting? Can action be? Can action be running away from dragons while they're chasing you, and then like hopping on a dragon and you flying? I mean, like that's kind of action packed, and then Aemon going to get Vhagar. Like, is it just scene pacing, or is it literally like I want soldiers cutting other soldiers in half? I mean, that's where I'm kind of like, I felt like there was action and there was pacing. Yes, I guess I do get the idea of like, it felt like at the end of season 1, it felt like, okay, we're getting ready to go to war. And now at the end of season 2, it also feels like we're getting ready to go to war. When you step back from it though, at the end of season 1, it's like Rhaenyra and Alicent are like, all right, we're going to have to go to war. At the end of season 2, it's kind of like the whole realm is saying, all right, we got to go to war.
And the dragons are going to be used. That's the other thing. Is like, well, we want to use dragons, and now they're definitely going to use the dragons. And instead of being a means of which to keep people at bay, they are now encouraged to use those dragons. And that's kind of what we see in the last face-off. And I think what I've came to the conclusion with this action stuff that everyone always talks about. You're right. What is action? That's a very good question, Matt. What is, when people say nothing happened? I feel like that's a really loose way of throwing around criticism. I think it's lazy for the most part, because like you can objectively say things happened, right? Like,
yeah. I mean, in the season 1,
something happened.
In the season 1 finale, it's Vhagar and it's, Aemon and Luke.
Yeah.
But is that as cool as Daemon versus the Crab Feeder? No,
not at all. Not at all. But maybe it is. I don't know. I mean, it depends on who you're talking to, right? So
I think for everybody, it's. I mean, there was a fight. What's Lannister fought the pirate person,
Tyroshi or whatever.
Yeah. Well, is she Tyroshi? I don't know.
Lannister. I can't remember if the Tyroshi or not, but Lannister also should get a credit for being a B character.
Well, no, the Tyroshi specifically have the blue hair, which, by the way, we got lore accurate Tyroshi
for the first time. Let's go.
Dario Naharis had 2 different actors and did not have blue hair in either of them.
I think it comes down to this, Matt. I think people come to this show for different reasons. And one of the great things about Game of Thrones is that it served a lot of people's needs. It served the lasers and fireballs, but it also served for people who love good drama, and then also people who love cinematic presentation and beautiful scores and well done shows and costuming. And it just is this show that did a lot of that. Season 2 of House of the Dragon definitely leaned away from spectacle at times into more of the drama driven dialogue, presenting storytelling. And I don't think that there's anything wrong with that. I think it's in the DNA of Westeros to be like that. And this is very similar to what happened with the first 3 books of A Song of Ice and Fire. A lot of people think Storm of Swords is the best book that George ever written. Fair enough. I would agree. It is a closing of the first arc of the series. And then you have a new arc beginning in a fallout with Feast for Crows and Dance with Dragons. And a lot of people say, George lost his way. But when Winds of Winter comes out and it wraps up that arc, those 2 books look a lot better in retrospect. And I think people just kind of lose sight of the full process of the story. And that's why me and you were saying, well, think about this from a full story perspective. And we had a couple comments on YouTube saying that we were full of copium if we're talking about the full story of the show rather than just the season, which I think is nonsense. I just feel as if there are people who come to this looking for that season 6, 7, and 8 action, maybe even season 4 and 5 at some point. And they're not necessarily interested in season 1, 2, and 3. I mean, how many people do you know, Matt, who watch Game of Thrones and they said, yeah, you just got to get through season 1 of Game of Thrones. It's a little slow. That used to be the big thing people said.
Sure.
Oh, you just got to get to the final episode. But when you go back and watch, you're like, dude, the first 8 episodes of Game of Thrones, season 1, are phenomenal. And I'm using air quotes, folks. I'm being sarcastic. Nothing happens in those first 8 episodes.
They literally just cut out a battle.
They cut out. There's only 2 battles in the first 3 seasons of Game of Thrones, right? I think it's 2 battles, or first 4 seasons or something like that. So, I guess
if you want to call like big battles, I mean, again, that's where it comes down to just small. Like, do people consider the Cargill's thing? Just like for some people, is that enough? Because I'm down with that. If that's what you're,
I think,
because for me, I view action as pacing. Chases.
Action as big.
It can be like, in other movies, it can be a car chase. It doesn't have to be
it could be a conversation.
Yeah.
Think about it though. It could be a conversation. And I'll tell you what, Matt, a conversation we didn't get in season 8 that people were pissed off about. Whenever Jon ends up telling everybody who he is and his family, he's just like, I got something to tell you. And it cuts away. And people are like, what the hell? And it's like, yeah, that is action in a way, right? It's propelling the plot forward, and it's this big moment that we've been waiting for 10 years, and then we didn't get it, and that sucked. So like sometimes you need more dialogue. So I guess what I'm saying is I think the reputation of the show has brought a lot of people in here to be the lasers and fireballs and dragon show, and those people are very disappointed. And it seems like the bulk of the internet, that's what they're there for. And I shouldn't even say the bulk of the internet, a lot of the loud part of the internet, that's what they're coming here for. And that's not what House of the Dragon season 2 decided to go with. We'll see a lot more of that in season 3. They'll like season 3 more if they can stop the hate train. We'll see if they can admit when they're wrong. But I don't know. We'll have to see. Ryan Caldell did say he even said, he's like, I know you guys wanted this. We're going to open up season 3 with one of the most absurd on-screen battles we've ever done in Westeros history. So I guess we'll have to see.
Yeah. I mean,
I don't know.
I'm excited too. For me, I see it both ways. Like I think that we'll close out on this because I think we have a poll running on YouTube about it right now, and it's at 51%, 4 out of 5 stars. And it's still mostly positive. So
yeah, I'd give this season 4 out of 5. I think that's fair.
Yeah, 14% 5-star, 24% 3-star, 5% 2, 6% 1. So I mean, very overwhelmingly in the positive camp of the season. Some comments: 3.69 out of 5, 3 out of 5. I was 4 out of 5 until the finale. Then it dropped to 3 out of 5 when the episode ended. I felt like the season was planned to be 10, and then they said and it looks like, and then sort of actually now, like, we're getting reports that that's basically what happened. So yeah, I mean. Go ahead.
I want to ask you something, and I'm kind of poking the bear here of the internet, but do you think all these people who say this is worse than season 8 are going to watch season 3, Matt?
Yes. I do. 100%. Because we get comments on YouTube of people being like, wins is never going to happen. And it's like, then why do you keep watching all the videos when we update on anything that's mentioned at all?
Give up, guys. I don't even care anymore. I mean, they leave comment on every video, but also how many people said they weren't going to watch House of the Dragon because season 8 sucked, and then it ended up being the number 1 show on Max? It's just it kind of makes me, I don't know, makes me wonder about the thought process of people.
So for me, ultimately, again, I'm at a 4 to 5 stars. I totally get the people's frustrations with the finale, and I even to some degree I get people's frustrations with Daemon, right? And that it did feel like Daemon, who was like the action star of season 1. I mean, even scenes where Vaemond is like, these children are bastards, he's a whore, and then Daemon cuts his head off. Like, even something that small carries a lot of weight. And with Daemon basically being in like a, drunken sort of mystical, he's like literally drunk on whatever weirwood paste or something, right? That he's seeing all these visions and everything. So when you remove that element of it, I do think that causes a big shift. So I certainly get why people maybe didn't like that as much, because again, a lot of people are also casual viewers where they're not reading the books. And so they were expecting Matt Smith to be like, all right, I saw him in season 1. He's like murdering people stuff. Now there's a full blown war going on, and now he's just hanging out in this castle.
I think
So
Rhaenyra's side in general was underwhelming this season when you compare him to the Greens, which is what you
oh
said.
yeah,
The Greens were the all-stars of this season. And I do think, and I will say, I think Emma Darcy's phenomenal, performance excellent always, but Rhaenyra was most interesting post episode 1, where almost no dialogue and Emma Darcy stole the show. Like, I just thought that performance was so good.
oh yeah.
And I don't know, there's moments that are really, really good. However, I feel like I kind of expected a little bit more from the Rhaenyra character and then her side in general. So, if there's a criticism I can make, is that I can understand how somebody might find that the Rhaenyra side of things was a little bit underwhelming.
Yeah, and I agree. So, so I get people's criticisms for it, and I agree. And I agree with some of them. We have things we like, things we didn't like. It's a TV show, guys. Some people are gonna like something. Some people probably loved it. They're like, I loved every second of it. Some people
Most
are like,
things are not the best or the worst.
Some people like, I thought it was awful. I mean, I can guarantee you it's better than some of the other shows I've been watching this year, like The Acolyte. I have yet to watch a show this year that I thought The Bear was going to be like really good, and The Bear was kind of mediocre this year too. So
yeah, it's an up and down experience, and we're always going to try to be nuanced and look at. Me and Matt don't even always agree on stuff, and guess what? We're fine. Like, we're cool. I think this is something
you and I very much disagreed on the Alicent Rhaenyra first conversation.
Yes,
you were like, I didn't like it.
And I still like the episode. Remember, I was like, yeah, but there's so much good in this episode. And I like the conversation. And people are like, no, you need to stick with it, hate it. And I'm like, I don't hate it. I would tell you if I hated it. Here's the thing. And maybe this is a good reflection point, because I had this conversation myself at one point whenever, I started reviewing books and stuff. If you find that your critiques are generally worst, like disaster or masterpiece, right? Best or worst, always, you're most likely lacking in your ability to analyze whatever you're consuming, whether it be books or TV or art or whatever it is. There's usually way more grayness to things, and also considering other people's perspectives, I don't think it's a terrible thing. And I don't mean that you have to like everything or you have to hate everything, but generally, when it comes to like masterpiece or disaster being every single thing that you consume, you're probably lacking a little bit in your analytical ability. So that's just, I had to come to that at some point. When I was reviewing books all the time, I noticed I said a lot of 5 stars and a lot of 1 stars, and I said, that's probably not likely. That most books are 5 or 1 star. There's probably a lot of 3 stars in there, a lot of 2 stars, a lot of 4 stars.
And it's also based upon the scale you do. A lot of people like to do out of 10. I don't, because for me, I have a really difficult time not viewing a 10 scale as like a grade. And then I'm like, well, then like half, then I'm like, then 7, then essentially 59% is an F. And it's like, I don't know that everything is an F. But it's like, but sometimes I don't want to give something a 7 because I feel like it's a C, and I feel like I'm giving everything a 6 or a 7. Yeah. And then I feel like I'm not using this whole other scale. So that's why I like to do out of 5 for me, which is like amazing, great, good, mid, and trash.
And ultimately, ratings are fun.
The 2 being mid or okay. And and then
here's the thing.
Or even bad. I mean, it's like,
the way you talk about things and the way you formulate your feelings and your thoughts of something matter a lot more than a star rating or a number rating. You got to be able to kind of like get to a place in your mind where you feel like you're relaying exactly what your experience was. And I think me and you have done a lot of work on that. And I think season 2, we've been better than we were in season 1. And that's why our episodes, we get both comments, hey, you're too positive. Hey, you're too negative. But that's okay.
Yeah. Well, let me tell you. So Teresa and I just went and saw Twisters, which
how was it?
I walked out of Twisters, and I'm somebody who I'm looking at like cinematography, and I'm like understanding all of the references to the original one and like all of these things. And also I'm like, did I just have a good time? I walked out of Twisters. I'm like, dude, this might be 4 to 5 stars. Teresa's like, that was a 3-star movie. Like, just is what it is. And I was like, I don't know, man. They quite literally, the first half of the movie is designed in a way to set up a pun in the middle of the movie that is quite literally, this ain't my first rodeo pun. And I was like, the expert level of craftsmanship it would take to design an entire movie. No, it was fun. I had a ton of fun with Twisters. Anytime something can do like anytime you have one of these sequel movies where they, like, hey, we're gonna do the thing, but they don't force it down your throat to be like, hey, look, we like did the thing from the original. So they did a lot of like paid homage to like shots from the original and stuff like that, but they didn't like cram it in your face to be like, look how obvious it is we're saying or doing the thing. So I always really appreciate that. I mean, it was just a good, it's just fun. It was just a good movie, but I do feel like, hey, it deserves some extra points. I mean, I can't give it a 5 out of 5. It's not, that good, but it's certainly a 4 out of 5. But as an experience, I was like, I had total fun. It was a 5 out of 5 experience, but
yeah, and maybe that's an example of something that's just a lot of fun, good time, kind of, popcorn watch, and you want to give it a 4 out of 5 or 3 out of 5, right? But then if you give it Game of Thrones episode 3 out of 5, it feels like you expected it to be 5 out of 5. You know what I'm saying? Like, and that's where ratings and stuff are so hard.
And that's where I talked too about this last week's episode, where this last week's episode is getting like, really low reviews. But I feel like in the future, when people are watching this you're experiencing it in a different concept, like the experience of the finale of waiting the whole, like 2 years to get the season and going into it with the expectations that we just saw all these people get dragons. And now it's like, we're going to have a battle. And then you don't see any of that stuff. Yeah. The experience of that is rightfully, like, for a lot of people, a 3 to 2 star experience. So like, that's where I'm like, I get it. But as a standalone episode, when you watch this in the context of a couple years where people are going to be watching it for the first time, just binging the whole thing through, I think people will watch this last episode and be like, oh, that was a freaking great episode.
Yeah. Yeah. And both experiences are valid. We're not,
because we're seeing that with Game of Thrones too, where it seems like now the same thing happened with the Star Wars prequels. Is when they first came out, all the old people were like, oh, these suck. And now it's like that people are like, oh no, the prequels are really good. And the internet has almost turned Revenge of the Sith into the best Star Wars movie.
And it's also there's a lot of nostalgia driven in that, right? People that are getting older, that was what they grew up with instead of the people who grew up with it in the 70s. I mean, there's so many human factors to add into experiences.
If the next season of House of the Dragon is like god awful, like let's just say it's like a 1 star, I mean like complete and utter trash, we may look, I mean, some people are already saying it. So there are some people right now already saying that, oh, like this makes season 8 look great. It's like, well, so season 8 isn't as bad as you think then, is it? You know what I mean? Like that's the
but for people who experience it in the time, they'll remember that their whole lives and that level of disappointment and whatnot.
Yeah,
but
so it's different. So it's all subjective,
It is. It all subjective. And I think that it would just, sometimes the sky isn't falling. And sometimes it's okay to be like, yeah, I liked most of it. There's some stuff I really didn't like. Season 3, let's see what happens. I think that's where me and you were at, right? Like, I'm very excited.
Oh, yeah. I feel confident in I gave it a 4 out of 5 on our poll, and that's what our fans and everybody, or people who watch our show and stuff, are saying too. So that's where I'm at. So I think that's a good place to leave it. So yeah, we may come back and do some more talking about it. But yes, for a lot of people who are listening to us for the first time, let me just say this. What we do, Jimmy and I normally really do, is actually we're going through the books. So a lot of people never really read the main series of books, and we will be diving back into that shortly. We still have a little bit of more House of the Dragon season 2 content to get through, and then we'll be diving back into our reread of A Song of Ice and Fire. You can check out quite literally hundreds of episodes of us breaking down the books, discussing the theories, going chapter by chapter. I mean, it literally goes back like 5 years. It's crazy. And maybe even longer than that. I don't even know how many years we've been doing it. So, but yes, we're continuing, and we'll be continuing that on probably it's August, about September and October, until Dunk and Egg comes out.
And maybe we'll even do some Dunk and Egg episodes, like read the stories because they're so short.
We're definitely gonna have to do the Hedge Knight before.
Yeah. Cool.
Yeah. So awesome. With that, remember, we do have a Patreon episode coming as well, and some other content and stuff we have planned for you guys. So with that, guys, as always, want to say thank you for watching. Thank you for listening. And yeah, leave a vote on that poll so we can see what everyone else thinks. Because right now it seems like everyone's actually a little more in line with what we're thinking, Jimmy.
Yeah, it all evens out eventually.
It does. So with that, as always, guys, remember that winter is coming.